Welcome to the ABCCM Crisis Ministry Volunteer Training Module on Bill Protocols. The following information is to educate ABCCM counselors to make inquiries and pledges for financial assistance in crisis situations. ABCCM utilizes the funds we receive from our 287 member churches and occasionally government funding sources to provide financial assistance in critical crisis situations. This is defined as being within 5 days of the disconnection of a utility or actual disconnection of a utility. ABCCM crisis funds can also be used to help households avoid eviction if they rent, and in some situations foreclosure if they have a mortgage. ABCCM crisis funds are also used to help with heating costs in the winter when clients are out of or are unable to access heating assistance through one of the various public assistance funding sources. In the case of a utility or rent, the amount that ABCCM pledges and subsequently pays must be the final amount to mitigate the crisis. So, if a client has to pay $200 to keep their power on, and it is their responsibility to pay $100 of this, that $100 must be paid before ABCCM can pledge the final $100. Proof of either payment or payments and or pledges or a single pledge must be documented. Also, it is crucial to confirm that our pledge will keep the client's utility on for at least 1 month, or will keep them from being evicted from their home for at least 1 month. In the case of a utility, it is good to have the utility representative verbally confirm that the client's utility will stay on for at least 1 month. In the case of heating assistance and possibly one of the prepay electric accounts, we'll talk more about that later on in this training, ABCCM may use enough funds to help a person through a few days so that they can have a chance to access public assistance or come up with enough funds on their own to take care of the crisis. It's very helpful for our data entry volunteers if the correct code for the type of assistance, the correct amount of assistance, and the correct funding source that we are using to help with financial assistance are listed on the correct place on our ABCCM crisis intake sheet. Please remember that there are 2 places to document financial assistance. The financial codes for the type of financial assistance that we give are UE, utility electric, UW, utility water, FK, utility kerosene, FP, utility propane, UG, utility natural gas, FW, utility firewood, FO, which is fuel oil, rent is R, M/F is mortgage or foreclosure, and L is for lodging. This is an example of a intake sheet that a crisis counselor would fill out while speaking with one of our guests. As you can see, this person has had an interesting recent few weeks, and because of their situation, they are both up for eviction from their home as well as the disconnection of their electric service. As you can see, the correct codes in the middle of the page, the amount that we're helping with, and the funding sources that we'll be using to pay for these things are listed correctly. You can also see in sort of the upper right-hand corner that the correct vendors and the addresses where those things need to be sent in the rental situation, as well as the amount, is put in the correct places. So one of the most common types of crisis that we see in terms of providing financial assistance is the potential or actual disconnection of electric service. In Buncombe County, there are 4 electric service providers, and Duke Energy Progress is the biggest electric provider of all of those 4, and it is likely the company that most of our clients access electric service through. Duke Energy is also an electric company who provides service to people in the Arden area of Buncombe County. French Broad Electric Membership Corporation is an electric service provider that some clients who live in the northern and northeastern areas, typically these are clients that North Samaritan Crisis Ministry site will see. And then Haywood Electric Membership Corporation is the 4th electric service provider in Buncombe County, and they provide electrical service to people in a particular area of the Candler Crisis Ministry site. geographical area. French Broad and Haywood EMC both have a type of service called prepay, which is in addition to the regular type of service that households are billed monthly, and we'll talk more about that when we get to those particular electric service providers. If we are going to be making a pledge for a client who has Duke Energy Progress or Duke Energy, you can call their agency hotline, which is 888-829-9522 to make that pledge. They will give you three options, either 1, 2, or 3. If you select number 2, then you can speak with a representative directly and make a pledge. If you have any questions that go beyond making a pledge, you can select number 3 and speak with the Duke representative. You can also make a pledge by selecting the third option. It's important to determine whether or not your client's power is still on when you speak with a Duke representative, and they can tell you if that's the case over the phone. If the power has been disconnected, it's possible that they might allow you to make a pledge for the final notice amount. However, it's more likely that the entire arrears amount, which is often more than the final notice amount, has to be paid in order to have the service restored. If you can confirm with one of our Beacon partners that they will be making a pledge, you don't really have to wait until their pledge goes through to make our pledge. Just a confirmation with one of our partners is enough. And after the pledge has been made, the assistance can be entered in a charity tracker and the appropriate spreadsheet for the funding source that's being used. You will need to be an approved agent to make a pledge, and your site coordinator and or crisis director can make sure that you're put onto Duke's approved agent list. If your client is a Haywood Electric Membership Corporation customer, they might have one of two types of bills or accounts. The most common type is a regular paper bill that will have a disconnect amount and date. The other type is a prepay account where a household can pay as they go, as much or little as they want. And this type of account doesn't require a deposit and does allow people to put smaller amounts on a more frequent basis into their account. It also allows Haywood EMC to disconnect their service remotely. They don't have to send a truck out to do this, and so it can create a more immediate and urgent crisis for some households. That also means, though, that once a pledge or payment is made, the meter can be reset and electric service can be restored by pressing a button on the box at the person's home. Prepaid customers don't have to have don't get their power disconnected on weekends or after business hours. However, that amount of usage does continue to accumulate, and accounts can go into the red either overnight or over weekends, and thus the amount that a client is essentially in the hole has to be paid or pledged before any more funds can be paid or pledged to the client's account. So if an example where a person has to pay $50 towards their electric account, but they have a negative balance of $9, if you want to pledge the $50, you have to actually pledge $59. When you're making a pledge to Haywood EMC, first you need to call their company by calling 828-452-2281 and then send a fax or an email to their billing department. And this will need to be done with a pledge letter stating the amount ABCCM will be paying. And at that point, the assistance can be entered into Charity Tracker and the appropriate spreadsheet for the funding source being used. It's really important that if you're working with Haywood EMC and you're using the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, that you understand that EFSP won't help with prepay accounts. And unlike Duke, where all charges are combined, Haywood EMC does break down their charges into taxes and some other charges. So if EFSP is being used on a regular Haywood account, you have to make sure you get a copy of the previous month's bill and be sure that only the electric service charges are the ones being covered by EFSP. French Broad Electric Membership Corporation is an electric service provider for some folks in Buncombe County, and they also have two types of accounts. The first is being a paper or wireless bill, which will have a final notice or disconnect notice with a dollar amount and disconnect date on it. If you're going to make a pledge for this type of bill, you can call French Broad 828-649-2051 and speak with a member of their credit department, and that's the person that you're going to make a pledge to. Once you've done that, the assistance can be entered in a Charity Tracker and the appropriate spreadsheet for the funding source being used by one of our wonderful data entry volunteers. If they have the other type of account with French Broad, which is a flex pay account, this is another sort of pay-as-you-go account and can be shut off remotely. If we're going to be making a pledge for this situation, what has to happen is a check has to be written at 24 Cumberland Crisis, and then either the client or an ABCCM representative will have to go to 24 Cumberland Crisis and then take that check by 4 o'clock p.m. to French Broad's office up in Marshall, and then get a receipt for that payment. And at that point, the assistance can be entered into Charity Tracker and the appropriate spreadsheet for the funding source being used. This is an example of a complete intake sheet. What we've done here is we have met with the client, figured out what the crisis is, tried to mitigate the crisis by using 2 different funding sources to help with rent and electric, and then a possible long-term plan for them. You can see that the person who helped this client has initialed or written their name in the box on the right-hand side of the sheet for calling the pledge in. And then you can also see that the person who entered the pledge in a Charity Tracker in the spreadsheet has initialed in the appropriate areas. ABCCM also helps people that are in danger of having their water service disconnected or have had their water service disconnected. The most common entity that we will work with that provides water service is the City of Asheville. This is a typical water bill for services between July and September of 2018. This is just a bill. It shows how much a person owes and when it needs to be paid. Looks like it needs to be paid in October. This is a pretty common looking bill. What you will need to pay attention to are the dates of service. So if a person brought you this bill in, say, December of 2018 for services between July and September, you will probably need to contact the City of Asheville to find out what their charges are and if they are in danger of disconnection of their water service, or possibly if they've had that service disconnected. This is an actual disconnect notice from the City of Asheville for water service. So you can see here, this person is pretty far past due. They have an amount that they have to pay, which is down at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, $96.81, and they have to pay it within 15 days of that notice, or they will have their water service disconnected. So again, most of the people that we're going to see if they're going to have their water service disconnected are Asheville City Water customers. Folks who have this service are billed once every 2 months, and those bills include water service, sewage, trash, and taxes. In order to have service restored or prevent a disconnection of service, the past due amount that is authorized by Asheville City Water has to be paid or pledged in full. It's important again that you notice that EFSP will pay for water, but it will only pay for the actual water service and won't help with sewage, trash, or anything else. If you're going to make a pledge to the City of Asheville, counselor has to call their phone number, 828-251-1122. You'll select option 1 and then option 0, and then make a pledge over the phone, and then you'll need to email or fax a pledge to Asheville City Water. Email is becoming the more convenient way to do that, and that email is egovutility@asheville.nc.gov. And at that point, the assistance can be entered into Charity Tracker and the appropriate spreadsheet for the funding source being used. Occasionally, a client might bring in a water bill from a private utility company. This situation is typically found when someone is in a mobile home park. It is legal in North Carolina for the owner of a mobile home park or grouping of homes to set up a private utility company and charge for profit, if they want to, their tenants for water. Typically, that usage is measured, documented, and charged appropriately, yet sometimes you might find that it is not. But in order for ABCCM to provide any funding, we really have to have a disconnect notice. A simple bill won't suffice, and the bill really needs to provide the dates and amount of water usage, and again must say that a certain amount has to be paid by a certain date to avoid disconnection of service. You'll then need to contact the representative of that private utility company to determine what type of pledge, whether it be just a verbal or a written pledge, is necessary and how it has to be submitted. If you do make a pledge in that type of situation, you can then put it on Charity Tracker and the appropriate spreadsheet for the funding source being used. This is an example of a pledge letter that ABCCM would submit to possibly Asheville City Water or whoever for a person's water service. And it does state that we expect that this pledge will help them avoid the disconnection of their service. ABCCM also provides funding for people who are in danger of being evicted from their homes. This is a very important function that ABCCM serves. It's very difficult for a person to get back into housing if they've been evicted. So if we can prevent that from happening once a person's received an eviction notice, it's a very, very important thing that ABCCM Crisis does. Please be aware that this is a difficult time for people. Losing their home, their shelter, is a very stressful situation, and so being as caring and helpful as we can is an important thing for ABCCM counselors to do. In North Carolina, it's state law that if a person or household is living in a home for more than 30 days, that is their place of residence, whether or not they've signed a lease. And then in order to be evicted by a landlord or property management company, they have to be presented with at least a 10-day eviction notice or notice to quit, stating why they're in danger of eviction. Typically, this would be non-payment of rent, what has to happen to avoid eviction, typically paying a certain amount, and how much time the household has to resolve that problem. And if the issue isn't resolved at the end of that at least 10-day period, the landlord or property management company can then file eviction papers at the county courthouse, go through the legal eviction process, and then have the tenant legally removed from the home. It is possible to halt the eviction process when it's in the courts. However, it's more difficult to do so, and it's really just up to the landlord and the court whether or not they accept that. It's easier to avoid the eviction if the situation can be resolved in that initial at least 10-day period. There are some situations where a person may be evicted for other reasons than non-payment of rent. We can possibly act as an advocate for someone in those situations, but the only time that ABCCM helps with financial assistance is if the eviction notice is because of late, incomplete, or non-payment of rent. We're going to need some things from the client if we are going to help with financial assistance. This goes across the board for any financial assistance. We need ID, social security cards, those sort of things. For rent, in addition to proof of who is in the home, we will need an actual eviction notice, not just a handwritten note, but an actual eviction notice or an official notice to quit form. You can find those forms on the internet if you need to give it to the client to have their landlord fill it out. We also need a W-9 form filled out by the landlord or property management company. And then if ABCCM is going to be a part of the solution, the rest of the parts of the solution have to be documented. So if a client makes any pledges, if a client gets any pledges, we need to document that. If the client makes any payments, they need to make sure that they get receipts for those payments. This is an example of a 30-day notice, eviction notice. It looks like they're a couple of months behind. They have to pay a certain amount by a certain time to avoid eviction. This is a 10-day notice to quit form, again, that you can find on the internet and give to your client to have their landlord fill out. This is basically a simple fill-in-the-blank eviction notice. This is a W-9 form. Again, we provide these in the ABCCM offices. You can also get it off the internet. Landlord can get it off the internet and fill it out and send it in. This allows our accounts payable department to know who to pay and where to send that payment to, as well as to help us not be complicit in any type of fraud situation. So once you're ready to make a pledge, you can call the landlord or property management company and make a verbal pledge, and then to make sure that this action will keep a person from being evicted. And then also you may need to submit a written pledge letter, and then once you've done that, you can give the form to the data entry folks, and they will put it onto Charity Tracker and the appropriate spreadsheet for the funding source being used. This is an example of a pledge letter. It states that ABCCM is paying a certain portion of this person's rent, and it also looks like a couple of payments were made by someone in the household's family. and then as well as another pledge from one of our partner organizations. This would be submitted to the landlord or property management company. ABCCM also helps with heating assistance. Our wonderful churches in Buncombe County have mandated us to provide heating assistance to people in Buncombe County for various reasons. Either it's because they can't access public assistance funds or have exhausted those funds over the course of a winter. And our mandate is to provide enough heating, fuel, or electric assistance so that a family can gain access to one of those public assistance funding sources. Those are the Crisis Intervention Program, Low Income Energy Assistance Program, Emergency Assistance, and Emergency Food and Shelter Program. And each of those programs are government-funded heating assistance programs. CIP, LEAP, and EA are currently distributed through Eblin. EFSP is currently distributed by ABCCM, Salvation Army, and Catholic Charities. There are other heating funds available throughout the winter that come from utility or heating companies directly. Share the Warmth is an example, which is a Duke Energy Progress heating fund distributed by Salvation Army. Sometimes we get some funds from businesses, grocery stores, and in some cases, especially when winters that are prolonged, very cold winters, a client might have exhausted all of the public heating assistance that they have access to and still may be in need of help to heat their home. So we're able to help in those situations as well with our benevolence fund. Once a pledge has been made, we can then put it on a charity tracker and the appropriate spreadsheet for the funding source being used. This has been a volunteer training module for ABCCM Bill Protocols.